when a Real Madrid manager sits in front of the press and blames a trophyless season on other issues, you have to look at who is missing from the room. And right now, Federico Valverde is in a hospital bed. Let's rewind to the night of May 11th at the Camp Nou. The final whistle has just blown, confirming a 2-0 victory for Barcelona. But this isn't just another El Clasico defeat. The result officially crowns the Catalan side as La Liga champions, with 3 entire matchdays left to spare. The stadium is a sea of blue and red. The noise is deafening, and amidst the confetti and the celebrations, the camera pans to the away dugout. There stands Álvaro Arbeloa. He looks isolated, staring out onto the pitch with a completely blank expression, a manager who inherited a sinking ship mid-season and is now forced to stand on the deck as it finally goes under. This is the visual that will define Real Madrid's catastrophic 2025-2026 campaign. A season that started with the promise of dominance under Xabi Alonso has ended in absolute barrenness. No La Liga title. Knocked out of the UEFA Champions League by Bayern Munich in the quarter-finals. A completely trophyless year for a club whose very existence is predicated on winning. If you turn on the television right now, the pundits are predictably dissecting the tactical failures. They are drawing arrows on screens, analyzing the lack of defensive transition, the disconnected pressing structures, and the spaces left open in the midfield. The media is hyper-focused on the 2-0 defeat. They are writing obituaries for this specific tactical setup and debating the defensive frailties that allowed Barcelona to slice through them so easily. But that is not the real story. The real story did not happen on the pristine grass of the Camp Nou. It did not happen during those 90 minutes against their bitterest rivals. The actual collapse of Real Madrid happened exactly 3 days earlier. It happened far away from the tactical cameras, behind a locked dressing room door at the Valdebebas training ground. On May 8th, news quietly filtered out a sanitized, carefully worded leak that Federico Valverde had been admitted to the hospital. The initial whispers suggested a training knock, perhaps a minor physical issue exacerbated by the grueling schedule. But the reality is far more severe, and far more damaging to the institutional fabric of Real Madrid. Valverde was hospitalized following a physical altercation with his own teammate, Aurelien Tchouaméni. This is an event so rare, so violently out of character for a modern, hyper-professionalized super club, that it forces us to reevaluate everything we think we know about this current Real Madrid squad. We are not talking about a heated exchange of words. We are not talking about 2 players pushing each other during a frustrating rondo session. We are talking about 2 foundational pillars of the club's midfield, 2 players who were supposed to define the next decade. At the Santiago Bernabéu, engaging in a physical confrontation so intense that one of them required medical hospitalization. Think about the lineage of the Real Madrid midfield. We spent years romanticizing the elegant, unspoken understanding of Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, and Casemiro. They operated with a quiet authority, a telepathic synergy that dictated the tempo of European football. Valverde and Tchouaméni were handpicked and groomed to inherit that exact mantle. They were supposed to be the brothers in arms for a new generation, appealing to millions of young fans worldwide, while satisfying the rigorous demands of the older, traditionalist socios. Instead, the image we are left with is one of broken trust and physical violence. The media is talking about the 2-0 defeat, the pundits are talking about a trophyless season. But the real story didn't happen on the pitch. It happened 3 days earlier, behind a closed dressing room door. And what it reveals is a club that hasn't just lost a league title. It has lost control of its own players. Let us return to Álvaro Arbeloa in the press room following the devastating 2-0 defeat at the Camp Nou. The journalists are pressing him relentlessly. They want answers for the tactical surrender, for the total lack of intensity, and for the agonizing sight of Barcelona, mathematically securing the La Liga title right in front of their faces. Arbeloa, looking every bit the interim manager thrust into an impossible situation, attempts to offer an explanation. He sits there, staring at the forest of microphones, and states, "We don't have much left to say. We understand the disappointment, the anger of the fans after a season like this. It is true that recently the team has faced many difficulties due to injuries and other issues." When a manager of Real Madrid uses a vague phrase like "other issues" to contextualize the total collapse of a campaign, he is deliberately obfuscating a reality, too dangerous to admit on live television. The injury he casually references is Federico Valverde lying in a hospital bed. The other issue is the horrifying fact that his own midfield partner, Aurelien Tchouameni, is the reason he is there. To comprehend the sheer gravity of this situation, you have to understand the specific dynamic between these two individuals. Valverde and Tchouameni were not just squad players. They were the designated successors to a legendary empire. They were supposed to be the new Kroos and Casemiro. They have battled alongside each other in the highest stakes matches in world football. For a professional relationship of that magnitude to deteriorate into a physical brawl severe enough to end in hospitalization, we must look far beyond a mere disagreement over a misplaced pass during a Thursday training session. This brings us to the core reality of the current situation at the Santiago Bernabeu. Physical violence between two absolute untouchables at the center of the pitch does not happen because of footballing differences. It happens because there is an absolute, suffocating power vacuum inside the club. When the Real Madrid hierarchy made the ruthless decision to sack Xabi Alonso in the middle of the season, they did not just remove a tactician from the dugout, they removed the ultimate, unquestionable authority figure. Alonso commanded absolute respect, not just through his modern tactical acumen, but through his immense, undeniable legacy as a player at the club. When he was summarily dismissed, the structural hierarchy of the dressing room was instantly vaporized. Álvaro Arbeloa was brought in to stabilize a sinking ship, but elite players at this level know exactly what an interim manager is. They know he does not hold the keys to their long-term futures. He does not dictate the summer transfer budget. He is, in the eyes of the dressing room, merely a placeholder, a substitute teacher asked to control a room full of apex predators. In the absence of a supreme, guiding authority, basic human nature takes over. The dressing room inevitably fractures into factions. Alpha personalities, who were previously kept in check by a dominant manager, suddenly feel the need to establish dominance over one another. The hospitalizing fight between Valverde and Tchouameni was not a random, isolated spark of frustration. It was a violent, kinetic explosion resulting from months of mounting anxiety and a total lack of leadership. It was two players trying to forcefully assert control over a team that had completely lost its institutional compass. To truly understand the magnitude of the May 8th incident, we have to look deeply into how information flows out of Valdebebas, and more importantly, what happens when that flow is suddenly, violently interrupted. When a player of Federico Valverde's immense stature is rushed to the hospital, the club's public relations machinery immediately goes into overdrive. The initial, carefully curated leaks to friendly publications in Madrid attempted to paint a picture of a regrettable, passionate training ground accident, a collision of high standards. But the deafening silence from the players themselves, the absolute lack of synchronized social media posts wishing him well, the eerie, unnatural quiet from the supposed leadership group tells a completely different, chilling story. The secret revelation here is not merely that a physical altercation occurred. Fights, even violent ones, occasionally happen in professional football. The true revelation is the underlying reason why it occurred with such devastating severity. This was not a petty dispute over a late tackle, nor was it a fleeting disagreement about defensive positioning during an intense rondo. This was a brutal, physical manifestation of a dressing room that had definitively fractured into deeply entrenched, warring political factions. When Xabi Alonso was ruthlessly sacked mid-season, the overarching tactical blueprint was thrown out the window. But far more dangerously, the institutional shield of the club was completely shattered. The players were suddenly left exposed to the relentless, crushing pressure of a failing season with no definitive, universally respected leader to absorb the blame or dictate the culture. In these hyper-pressurized, modern superclub environments, a power vacuum never stays empty for long. The dressing room naturally, and perhaps inevitably, divided. Consider the generational and ideological split within this squad. A dynamic that resonates strongly with fans of all ages who understand that the modern game isn't just about legacy, but about brand, individual leverage, and personal empires. On one side, you have the passionate traditionalists, the players who perceive themselves as the spiritual custodians of Real Madrid's legendary, mythical mentality. Federico Valverde, a player universally recognized as someone who bleeds the white shirt, naturally views himself as the ultimate enforcer of these uncompromising standards. On the other side, you have the new generation of elite, modern acquisitions players brought in for astronomical fees, who operate with a different kind of stoic swagger, autonomy, and immense individual power. Aurelien Tchouaméni? Under a dominant, undisputed manager, these two contrasting profiles complement each other perfectly. They create a ruthlessly balanced ecosystem. But under a transitional interim manager, they mutate into rival warlords. That is not a training ground bust-up. That is a hostile takeover. When Valverde and Tchouaméni physically clashed, they were not fighting over a loose ball. They were fighting for absolute ideological control of a completely fractured dressing room. It was a raw, visceral test of dominance. Who dictates the daily intensity? Who sets the non-negotiable standard when the manager's voice no longer carries any weight? When the established hierarchy collapses, the strongest, most influential egos in the room will inevitably collide to establish a brand new pecking order. This realization completely flips our perspective on Álvaro Arbeloa's role in this unfolding disaster. We look at him standing helplessly on the touchline at the Camp Nou, and we instinctively judge him as a tactician. We wonder why his substitutions are late, or why his pressing triggers are so thoroughly disorganized. But the reality is infinitely more grim. Arbeloa is not managing this Real Madrid team. He is merely trying to survive it. He is a man who was handed the keys to a burning building and instructed by the board to act like it is just a minor, temporary renovation. Every single time he faces the press, every time he relies on a vague, deflective phrase like other issues, he is not protecting the tactical secrets of the squad. He is acting as a desperate human shield for a group of players who have completely turned on each other. He is acutely aware that he has absolutely zero institutional authority to genuinely discipline a player with the financial backing of Tchouaméni, nor can he publicly reprimand a beloved fan favorite like Valverde. He is a mere spectator in his own dressing room, forced to watch silently as billion-dollar assets engage in a catastrophic civil war that has ultimately destroyed the club's entire season. Now, there is a completely valid counter-argument to all of this. The generous reading of this situation is that the extreme pressure of playing for Real Madrid simply boiled over. We are talking about elite, hyper-competitive athletes who are biologically and psychologically programmed to win at all costs. When you factor in the physical toll of a grueling season, the humiliation of being knocked out of the Champions League by Bayern Munich, and the agonizing reality of watching Barcelona mathematically secure the La Liga title, emotions are bound to run dangerously high. In this generous interpretation, the brawl between Federico Valverde and Aurelien Tchouaméni was simply a tragic anomaly, a momentary lapse of reason born out of sheer, overwhelming passion for the badge. You could argue that this is just the ugly side of a winning mentality, a desperate, violent frustration that their empire was temporarily falling apart. The less generous reading, however, is that the hierarchy at the Santiago Bernabéu has completely collapsed, and that institutional collapse was engineered from the very top. To understand the absolute loss of the dressing room, we have to look directly at the boardroom. When the executive leadership made the ruthless, highly disruptive decision to sack Xabi Alonso in the middle of the campaign, they sent a very specific, very dangerous message to the playing squad. They did not just remove a tactician, they permanently removed the concept of unshakable managerial authority. Whether you grew up watching the rigid, disciplined eras of the past, or you are a younger, middle-aged fan fully immersed in the modern, player empowerment era of football, the fundamental law of dressing room politics remains exactly the same. When the board sides against a manager of Alonso's stature and history, they inadvertently transfer all institutional power directly to the players. They prove to the squad that the manager is entirely disposable, but the star players are untouchable and eternal. This is the toxic, leaderless environment in which Álvaro Arbeloa is currently drowning. Why would a modern superstar, backed by immense wealth, millions of global followers, and a massive independent PR machine, genuinely submit to an interim manager? Arbeloa has absolutely no leverage. He cannot threaten to sell them in the summer. He cannot permanently drop them to the bench without facing the immediate wrath of the board, who fundamentally need their most expensive assets on the pitch to maintain the club's commercial value. He is essentially a ghost pacing the touchline, a man pretending to hold the reins of horses that have long since broken out of the stable. Therefore, the players are left to govern themselves. Ben Benzaclidi in history tells us that when a group of high-profile alpha personalities are left completely unmanaged in a high-stress, high-stakes environment, they do not form a peaceful, democratic council. They form factions. They battle for absolute supremacy. The hospitalizing fight between Valverde and Tchouaméni is ultimate proof that the board's mid-season intervention did not save the campaign. It merely unleashed a brutal civil war. Real Madrid's biggest opponent this year was not Barcelona, nor was it Bayern Munich. Their biggest opponent was the structural void created by their own executives. The 2025 to 2026 season is mathematically over for Real Madrid. But the true consequences of this campaign are only just beginning. What we are about to witness over the coming months is not a standard summer rebuild. It is going to be a ruthless, calculated institutional purge. Álvaro Arbeloa is fully aware of his fate. When the season officially concludes, he will be quietly ushered out of the managerial spotlight, gracefully accepting the public narrative that he simply wasn't ready for the tactical demands of the top job. He will absorb the damage for the executives who placed him in that impossible crossfire. But replacing the manager is the easy part. Fixing the underlying rot is an entirely different, monumental task. Whoever Florentino Perez appoints next, no matter how impressive their CV or how fierce their reputation, will not be inheriting a unified squad of elite athletes. They will be walking into a fractured, deeply suspicious dressing room. The physical brawl between Federico Valverde and Aurelien Tchouaméni cannot be erased by a new tactical whiteboard. You do not simply forget that level of internal violence. The lines have been drawn. The ideological split between the traditionalists and the modern, empowered superstars is now a permanent feature of the Valdebebas landscape. The incoming manager will have to spend their first 6 months not coaching football, but navigating a delicate, highly explosive political minefield. Now, I want to pass this over to you. The generous reading is that Real Madrid always finds a way to bounce back. That this is just a dark, chaotic chapter in an otherwise glorious decade. But the less generous reading is staring us right in the face. Is this just a temporary collapse? Or has player power at Real Madrid finally reached a critical mass that is destroying the club from the inside out? Tell me in the comments what you actually think. Come back to this video in July, when the transfer window is in full swing and the first shocking, high-profile exit is announced from the Santiago Bernabeu. Because I guarantee you, the root cause of that departure will not be about wage demands or playing time. It will trace all the way back to the silence, the power vacuum, and the violence of May 8th. If this kind of uncompromising, behind-the-scenes analysis is what you come here for, hit subscribe. We are watching a footballing empire try to stitch itself back together, and we will be here to document every single fracture. See you in the next one.